Hello guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about some big trade rumors involving the Pittsburgh Penguins, involving Sidney Crosby, Evgeni Malkin, Kris Letang, and really that whole Penguins roster, as this offseason could be a huge turning point for this Penguins franchise in a lot of different ways. But when it comes to this Pens offseason, and specifically Kris Letang and Evgeni Malkin, are they on the wayside? Could they leave Pittsburgh? Where could they go? And what do the Penguins do next? Watch till the end for the entire breakdown, all the analysis, and all the trade rumors. And make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of the people that are watching are not subscribed. So if you like hockey and if you like trade rumor content, this channel is the place to be. Now, after the Penguins lost that Game 7 and lost that series versus the New York Rangers, we got a lot of big details on the future of this Penguins team. And if you don't know, two of the core pieces in Evgeni Malkin and Kris Letang are UFAs after this season. And we saw throughout really the last year and a half of the Penguins were loading up for this season specifically. They went out, they got a big guy in, as well as Rickard Rakell in the trade deadline, and they really wanted to make sure that this was at least a year they could contend and have that group all together, because one of those guys could end up leaving. And potentially for the Penguins, both Kris Letang and Evgeni Malkin could be on their way out. Now let's go on to a tweet that really encompasses both Crosby, Malkin, and Letang's situation this offseason, and this was coming from Andrew Filipponi, who was talking about Rob Rossi's radio hit on 937 The Fan, talking about all three of those players and all that's come up over these past few months. And he said this: Penguins insider Rob Rossi says on 937 The Fan that the Penguins offered Kris Letang and Evgeni Malkin 3-year deals worth $15 million each, $5 million annually, and that those lowball offers did not sit well with Sidney Crosby. Now, the thing is, this is very interesting, and most notably here is most likely a deal and a contract that was offered before the playoffs. So this was something that maybe they were negotiating throughout the season, something like that. But for both these players, according to Rob Rossi, $5 million was the offers, and with Sidney Crosby especially, he did not like the Penguins going for those lowball offers and contract negotiations that were never going to work out. Now, there was some more interesting stuff as well in terms of Kris Letang's situation. There was this rumor right here from NHL Rumors encompassing some of the things that Elliotte Friedman said, and Elliotte Friedman said that he's heard the Penguins have offered Kris Letang a 4-year deal at a bit under the 7.25 he made this year. So probably maybe 7.1, maybe even $7 million for 4 seasons. But especially for Kris Letang, we know that that 3-year, $5 million offer was obviously not accepted, and this one was also not accepted either, which leads me to believe that Kris Letang likely wants at least 7.5 on that 4-year deal, maybe even 8. And personally for me, in the open market, especially with how many teams need a potential offensive defenseman, Kris Letang I could see getting maybe 8.2, maybe 8.5 if that term is on the shorter side of things. But Kris Letang is a fantastic D-man, and for the Penguins, I would say he is the biggest priority they should have. There was also this tweet from Habs Links with some more information on the 32 Thoughts, where he said this: Elliotte Friedman of the 32 Thoughts podcast on pending UFA Kris Letang, who's been linked to the Habs in the rumor mill. I heard that when it comes to that, to what Pittsburgh was thinking, contract terms, and what Letang was thinking, they weren't on the same page. So even though Pittsburgh should be going for Kris Letang and should have it as the number 1 priority, even with him, it doesn't seem like they're on the same page whatsoever, and there will be a lot of talking before any contract even gets close to being done. And I also found this tweet from Mike Benton talking about some more details on that 32 Thoughts podcast, and he said, at 17:10, the team to watch in free agency this summer is the Kraken. Right shot defenseman John Klingberg and Kris Letang mentioned among potential candidates for offensive upgrades, and Seattle is definitely a really interesting spot for players like that. I think John Klingberg might be more likely just because he's a lot younger, but still, a team like that desperately needs that type of offensive force, and Kris Letang can be that player. So that just again shows the market for a player like Letang, and especially considering the Kraken's cap situation, they'd be more than willing to be able to pay him what he wants. Now let's break this down for a second. For the Penguins, for this season, this past year, they finished with 0 final cap space, which means that this current roster, this 2022 roster, didn't have any cap space on the books. Now, for Pittsburgh, you're likely to get rid of a couple UFAs at least. Rickard Rakell is probably going to be gone, and you also have Nathan Beaulieu, who probably won't be back. So that's about $3.7 million million at the very least to be able to work with. Now, here's the thing. With their two big guys in Kris Letang and Evgeni Malkin, it really becomes an interesting battle. For Kris Letang, if he wants a $1.2 million raise, if he wants to get to that $8.5 million range and really get that high cap hit, because let's be honest here, this might be the best chance Letang has at a big contract left in his career, he's going to want that type of payday, and you on top of that would have to give him that raise. So let's say he needs to go to $8.5 million for the Penguins to keep him. At that point, you'd still have about 2.5 to work with, and the good news is also Evgeni Malkin would likely take a pay cut. He makes $9.5 million next year, and let's say he goes down to $7 million, for instance. So that's about $2.5 million less, and you can make that work. You can absolutely make that work, and that's a pretty huge thing. But even with that $2.5 million cut, if they already keep both of these players, you'd still have about $2.5 million to work with at that point. And here is the biggest problem for the Pittsburgh Penguins, especially in keeping both Evgeni Malkin and Kris Letang. Look at who else they have to sign this year. On the UFA side especially, the biggest one is Bryan Rust, who this past year and over the past few years has made $3.5 million, one of the best bargain contracts in the entire league. But he's going to be a UFA after this year, and when you look at his production and how key he is to this Penguins team, he's going to get a humongous raise. 60 games played, 24 goals, 34 assists for 58 points, and when we look at his playoff statistics, he had 8 points in 7 games played. Huge part of that Penguins playoff roster, and I look at it, and personally, for me, I could see Bryan Rust getting maybe even $7 million on the open market. I mean, Trevor Van Riemsdyk, for goodness sakes, got a $7 million 7-year contract. So for me, when I look at Rust, when I see the style of player that he is and how well he adapts to the playoff game, I could see so many teams out there with that extra little bit of cap space wanting to add a top 6 winger and really wanting Bryan Rust. And for me, I think you could get that on the open market. For Pittsburgh, you might be able to get him like around 6.5 if you sign him to a longer term deal. But I think for Bryan Rust, he also knows that this is a huge opportunity to get the biggest payday of his career after taking such a great pay cut with the Penguins before. And that's where the problem begins. You have $2.5 million to work with at that point to sign Bryan Rust, get him in that extension. And for me personally, who I'd rather extend, it's Bryan Rust every single day of the week. I'd much rather have Bryan Rust on this Penguins team than Evgeni Malkin. With the health of Malkin's situation, with him being 35, I just don't see it working out, and I think he'd want to still get a pretty good payday. I don't think he's going to go down to like $5 million or something, even though he maybe should for Pittsburgh to be able to re-sign him. But you combine Rust's cap hit, you also combine the fact that they might need to give Evgeni Kapanen a raise. They really want to re-sign Evan Rodrigues, and he's at $1 million. He's going to get like maybe 3.5, maybe 4 at the least. You have Danton Heinen, who was pretty solid for them, and you see all these different guys factoring in. And in my opinion, especially in Malkin's situation, let alone Kris Letang, I don't believe the Penguins are going to be able to keep all these guys and still be under the cap. It's just impossible for them. So personally for me, I think the most realistic offseason for this Pittsburgh Penguins team is letting go of Evgeni Malkin, giving Kris Letang a raise, and also extending Bryan Rust. You might need to trade Kapanen or maybe even Jason Zucker perhaps, but I do think this Penguins team should use the extra cap space they could potentially get to acquire more young, youthful talent. Here's another situation I could see Pittsburgh going in. They could maybe even give up both Malkin and Kris Letang to free agency. That is a possibility. Maybe they even trade Jason Zucker, but they go for much younger options and much more consistent and healthy options too. For that defense especially, there could be some big upgrades and could be some big moves that we see, and I feel like for Pittsburgh, if you're going to see those type of moves, you might need to get rid of a guy like Zucker. You might need to get rid of a guy like even a Kris Letang if you really want to fit all these guys under the cap. But in my opinion, the Rust situation is the biggest one, and I feel like with him being a UFA, that's the biggest reason why we will see big changes with this Penguins Penguins team. Now, there was also a recent article published by, of course, Bleacher Report, talking about the 6 most likely landing spots for Evgeni Malkin, and I just looked this up. I'm just going to be reacting to this list with you guys. We could potentially see where Malkin could go in free agency. The first one is the New Jersey Devils. I don't see that happening with their center situation unless Malkin wants to play third-line center behind Hischier and Hughes, but I mean, that's an interesting fit. They definitely have the cap space. The New York Islanders potentially being in on Evgeni Malkin, I mean, that would be interesting, but also it would depend on their future and who they bring in coaching-wise. I don't think Malkin would be the greatest with Barry Trotz, but now that he's gone, there might be a different identity there. But they also have top 3 centermen in Barzal, Pajot, and Brock Nelson. That doesn't really feel like a fit to me either. Third is the Boston Bruins. That actually makes a lot more sense. That makes a lot more sense to me. The Bruins, obviously, with potentially Bergeron gone, especially if that happens, they need to find somebody to fit on that top 6. And I can definitely see Malkin being that guy. Even without Bergeron retiring, you might still see the Bruins pushing for Malkin. So that's the first good fit, I think, on this list. The Anaheim Ducks, that would be interesting. Their center situation is kind of in flux right now. Obviously, Ryan Getzlaf is retiring, and he'll be off the books there. So Anaheim will definitely have the cap space, but I'm not sure if Malkin will want to go to a team that's kind of on the pretender side of things, but maybe he can be a part of that team pushing for the playoffs. Then you have the Toronto... the Toronto Maple Leafs. Okay, I don't know what Bleacher Report is doing right here, but no, that's that's not happening unless Malkin wants to take like $3 million or something, which I don't see happening. There's no way the Leafs are going to get Malkin. That's just not gonna happen unless they trade Tavares. And then the 6th team with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Personally, I think the Bruins and maybe the Ducks are the only 2 good fits on this list. The rest of them are pretty bad. The Maple Leafs being getting Malkin. Oh my goodness. But that is kind of it's a general outline of where Malkin could go. But I do see the Bruins being the best fit in a Malkin situation. And again, I feel like this is a guy that probably will get around 5.5, maybe even 6 on the open market, maybe even more perhaps. And I just don't think the Penguins are going to be able to do that and keep everybody on board. One thing is for sure, though, with this Penguins offseason, it's going to be hectic, it's going to be crazy, and we will see some big changes. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Comment down below what your thoughts are on this Penguins team. What do you think they should do this offseason? Do you see Letang going? Do you see Malkin going? And where? And what do you see the Penguins doing this entire offseason? What big moves do they make? Of course, make sure you comment in the comment box everything you might think about. And, of course, share this video with your friends. Get it out there to anybody you guys know. And click on this card for all of my hockey trade rumor content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a fantastic day. Drink some water. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.